Well, we start this morning with news out of the Middle East, and troubling news at that. Fox News Alert: Israel says Hamas has violated the ceasefire, attacking Israeli soldiers in the Gaza Strip, prompting Israel to carry out strikes in retaliation.
Chief Foreign Correspondent Trey Yingst joins us live from Tel Aviv with the very latest. Trey, what do we know about these attacks?
Yeah, hey guys, good morning. An Israeli military official telling Fox News that Hamas violated the ceasefire agreement, launching an RPG and a sniper attack against Israeli forces inside Gaza. In response, the Israeli military bombed targets in the southern and northern parts of the enclave. This military official telling Fox this is a bold violation of the ceasefire. Remember, the Israelis are still in control of 53% of Gaza. They have remained on high alert over concerns that Hamas might violate the agreement. And they built out a series of preparations for this very possibility. Already today, there are calls from Israeli ministers on the far right, including Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, to resume the war against Hamas. But we do understand Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to hold security consultations today about this Hamas ceasefire violation to determine the next steps. All of this taking place as U.S. officials are set to visit the region this week, including Vice President J.D. Vance and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. And last night, the State Department released a warning of their own against Hamas. They said the United States has informed the guarantor nations of the Gaza peace agreement of credible reports indicating an imminent ceasefire violation by Hamas against the people of Gaza. So we're looking at two different things here. One, a violation of the ceasefire against Israeli forces, and two, a warning by the U.S. State Department that Hamas intends to carry out more attacks against their own people. Remember last week, we saw those horrific execution videos of Hamas gunmen roaming the streets of Gaza and killing their opponents. And they still have not fulfilled all of their agreements as it relates to ceasefire deal plans. And we're talking about phase one here. They were supposed to release the bodies of all of the hostages that remain inside Gaza. And while overnight they returned the remains of 2 additional hostages, including hostage Ronen Engel, there are still 16 hostages that are deceased inside the Gaza Strip that Hamas must return as part of their agreed upon deal. And so moving forward, we have to wait and see what happens as it relates to this ceasefire violation. But again, the latest information that we have, according to the Israeli military, Hamas has violated the ceasefire agreement by firing on Israeli forces inside Gaza. And in response, the Israeli military launched new airstrikes against the enclave. Guys?
So Trey, you mentioned the executions this week. There's also been some infighting since the ceasefire began among Hamas forces inside Gaza. To what degree should we be concerned that that stability could lead to this whole thing falling, that instability could lead to this whole thing falling apart?
Look, the onus here is on Hamas. President Trump released a 20-point peace plan giving Hamas amnesty, actually giving them the opportunity to lay down their weapons and commit to peace and even be able to stay in Gaza. It was, in some ways, a sweetheart deal for Hamas. But this is a terrorist organization, and so often when they are given an opportunity, they don't take the opportunity. And so the groundwork is laid for a ceasefire agreement to complete phase one and to enter into phase two, which would include them laying down their weapons and ultimately creating a scenario where Gaza can be rebuilt and the Palestinian people there, more than 2 million of them, can have some semblance of peace. But this will require those officials that remain inside Gaza and also in Qatar to adhere to the agreement that President Trump has laid out. And so until that happens, there will likely be more moments of instability inside Gaza. But also remember, as part of that peace plan that was crafted by the Trump administration, there is an ushering in of a technocratic government for the Gaza Strip that will also include Palestinian leadership to create some sense of stability within the enclave. So all of these benchmarks have to take place, and moving forward, it will be very challenging to implement phase two of the deal. And we can't expect more moments like this where Hamas, a fractured organization, launches attacks within Gaza. The question is how the Israelis will respond and what negotiating teams in Egypt or in Qatar will be able to do to get this deal back on track.
I'm really curious about this vacuum, this power vacuum that appears to be inside of Gaza and inside of Palestine. So who's going to fill that gap? Because you say these technocrats But we're hearing about these executions, so Hamas still trying to keep control. Can you break that down for us a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of Gaza and who could control Gaza, they don't want to give power to any of the military factions there. And we talk often about Hamas, the largest organization in Gaza, the group that was in control, that was the mastermind behind the October 7th massacre. But there are also a series of smaller organizations, including Islamic Jihad, PFLP, and DFLP. And these are organizations that have weapons. In some cases, they still have rockets amid the smaller organizations. And they will all be vying for power inside Gaza. But what the president doesn't want is one of these terrorist groups to take control of the enclave. So they want to usher in, with the help of regional countries, a moderate government for the Gaza Strip. And there are businessmen, there are those who have done business even with Israel before that could be in control of Gaza in the future. But there's one also very important line item in the Trump administration peace plan, and that is bringing in Arab countries to act as an internal stabilization force. So we're talking about soldiers from different countries across the region that would have oversight from U.S. Central Command that would help to bring peace inside Gaza, because you will need that, because you'll have Hamas and these smaller organizations trying to destabilize the situation, because these are not good actors. And that's the reason that the Trump administration has crafted this plan with the oversight of U.S. Central Command, but not American boots on the ground inside Gaza, to try and move this along, understanding that these organizations are not going to play ball in every case. And so you have this issue of who will run Gaza in the future. But one interesting thing here, and it will be a course of conversation in the future, is the possible role of the Palestinian Authority. This idea has faced resistance from the Israeli echelon, the political echelon, and also the military echelon, understanding that the Palestinian Authority is largely known as a corrupt organization, not only inside the Gaza Strip, where it exists there, but, of course, in the West Bank, in Ramallah. But what we have seen is a willingness by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to have these conversations, because what President Trump and his top officials, including Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, have been able to do within the course of the negotiations is build trust. They built trust among the Israelis and Palestinians, trust that did not exist before. And so there are major questions about who will control Gaza in the future, but all of this is going to take place in a step-by-step process. And so while Hamas has violated the ceasefire agreement and the Israelis have responded, and you have these calls from minister in Israel to resume war, this does not mean that the ceasefire is over. Ceasefires are never pretty. They often face violations, but there is still an opportunity for this Trump administration peace plan to hold. Well,
and this is what Hamas does. They break ceasefires time and time again. What seems different this time, Trey, is that as the discussions will pick up in Qatar, is that you've got Arab buy-in this time, which didn't seem to exist before. Trey Yingst, Live Force in Tel Aviv. Trey, thank you. Keep us posted and update us throughout the morning.
Thanks, Trey.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.